Please.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everybody. I am Anuj Mehrotra. I am the Dean for the Georgia Tech Scheller College of Business, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to this episode of Tech Talks Business. And today, our honored guest is Paul Brown, co-founder and CEO of Inspire Brands. It's such a pleasure to have you here, Paul.
It's really great to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation.
So, Paul, let's get started on, I first met you, I think sometime in the fall at the opening bell ceremony where you spoke to our students and told them to seize their big moment, seize their big bang moment. And I want to ask you, did you seize your big bang moment? What was it? And tell us a little bit about that journey from tech days to where you are today.
Yeah, I've been fortunate. There have been quite a few, I would say, moments where if I look back, if I had not done that I wouldn't be where I am today. And don't want to bore everybody with going through it, but a few big ones are big career moves. And so the first is I was a partner at McKinsey in London, and I was asked to go to Expedia.com first in a strategy role. And that was a really big move, deciding to leave, obviously, as a partner in a consulting firm, move my family from London to Seattle. While the climates are similar, it's opposite, more or less the opposite side, and especially where they were. But that led me to really get deep in the travel sector. It gave me the opportunity after a few years for my first real P&L experience. Ultimately got promoted to be president of Expedia.com. It's where I really learned a lot about e-commerce and actually consumer marketing for the first time under the tutelage of Barry Diller. And I would say that if that had not happened, that's what really put me on the track of being a general manager, right? A line manager, a P&L manager, which ultimately led me to be able to go to Hilton as president of brands and commercial, and then ultimately to Arby's and then here. And a lot of what we're doing at Inspire, the business model that we have created here, really came from the learnings and the experiences that I had at Expedia and Hilton, quite honestly.
That's excellent. I'm going to actually follow up on that. But first, before I follow up on that, let me ask you this question. Like 7, 8 years ago, Inspire Brands was not there, and you built it, and now we have $30 billion in global sales with more than, 30,000 restaurants globally? How does this happen? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, I left Hilton to become CEO of Arby's. And Arby's, at the time, it was a typical private equity play. So it had been spun out from Wendy's Arby's Group. Rourke Capital had actually acquired it. And so we went through the process of turning around the Arby's brand. And about 3-4 years into it, we were trying to decide what to do with the business, right? And one of the things we looked at is, do we take it public as a standalone restaurant brand? Mm-hmm. And I started looking around at other standalone restaurant brand CEOs, particularly of brands that size, and started listening to the earnings call and realized that they were not having a lot of fun, right? And I was listening, and they were lamenting about the challenges of actually trying to make the investments that were needed, particularly in technology. If you go, and this was again 7, 8 years ago, and I don't know if I want to be one of them, right? And so maybe there is a different way of doing this. And I looked around, and there were a lot of companies like Arby's at that size that were having the same set of struggles. And so I and the private equity team sat down and said, well, maybe there's a real opportunity here. Maybe there is this moment in time, mm-hmm. where you have a really large, relatively fragmented industry that is that point where particularly technology is coming in and transforming virtually everything around how customers interface with restaurants, and then ultimately what that enables from a business model transformation. And so maybe there's an opportunity to play a role in organizing, right, and consolidating this industry, and bringing together these great brands and products that have decades of great history, but ultimately are going to have a struggle to be competitive moving forward. Mm-hmm. And so that's the moment we said, maybe there is this opportunity, and then we sat and waited. Because it's one thing to say, well, we're going to do some acquisitions, but that doesn't mean they're out there to do. Along came, activists were actually involved in the industry quite a bit and poking around at various companies. And Buffalo Wild Wings became an opportunity, and that was our first acquisition. And that's when we created Inspire, right?
Yeah.
And changed the name of the company Inspire and kind of embarked upon this journey.
So you remarked, Paul, that you learned a lot from Expedia and experience with Hilton, and there's correspondence between what you learned in the hotel industry with restaurant brands. When I think of hotel industry, I think about, okay, I'm going to go to this Marriott tonight. If it's Monday, I'm going to pay $79. If it's Tuesday, it's going to be paying $99. Is there some revenue management part also that is applicable to restaurant for our students to buy a Dunkin' Donut, let's say, at a little bit discounted price on a particular day?
Well, that's one of the things that technology, that basically the industry becoming fundamentally more digital might enable, right? The number one thing that we actually took from the way the hotel industry is organized is actually how the brands share are tightly integrated around a set of shared capabilities, right? They are distinct brands in the eyes of the customers in many ways, but behind the scenes, they're actually sharing virtually everything. And so how we're organized in a tightly matrix structure and really building a platform underpinning these consumer brands is the biggest learning. But you described one example around how this industry has gone from being, for lack of a better word, entirely analog, right? If you go back 15 years in the restaurant industry, there was, you had the relationship with the customer started when they came on the property, and the second they left, you had no idea who they were. There was only one way to actually price to them, is whatever the menu board or whatever the menu card said to them. You couldn't do any customization of any of that. So now you step forward 15 years later, right? And so much of the interaction is actually digital, loyalty programs, all those things that have come into the restaurant industry that look a lot like hotel sector, airline sector. Mm-hmm. So what that does enable is, when it comes to pricing, a more personalized approach to discounting, right? And so, and you'll see that if you join apps, right, you're getting ultimately increasingly personalized offers, which is really, really impactful financially in in a company and an industry which has tremendously high operating leverage. But that's just one example. Everything associated with marketing has fundamentally changed. You go back 10, 15 years ago, the only way to market really in this industry is fundamentally mass marketing. You sent a message out either through mass channels like television or newspapers, and you hoped that it would reach the right person at the right time, and you'd hope that they actually take action on it. You couldn't measure whether they did or didn't because you didn't know who they were, right? And so it's very, very analog, very traditional, and very, very expensive. Now it's fundamentally different. Yes, TV is still a big part of it, but most of the marketing and demand generation is spent in more direct channels and digital channels. The increased efficiency of that, combined with the ability to target offers and be more precise in that, and make sure that the right message is hitting the right person at the right time, is a fundamental transformation in an industry that is incredibly advertising sensitive. So, you can tell I get quite excited about it because it is an industry, again, where this transformation is still just occurring, but in most cases, fundamentally positive to the business model.
Very scientific and very much up in the alley for Georgia Tech students, of course. But you mentioned after Arby's, there were some opportunities for acquiring certain brands. And then the opportunity presented itself. What does that mean? You go for a meal, with your family, you like the food, and you say, I'm going to acquire this brand, call up a CFO and say, can I do this? How does that work? What does that mean, the opportunity presenting itself?
Well, it did start out, it wasn't entirely opportunistic, right? So we did start out with us thinking about if we were going to put a portfolio of brands together, right? What type of brands make sense as part of that portfolio, both from the types of experiences to the customer, but also the type of capabilities they bring to the organization, right? And so, and we wanted them to be distinct. We wanted them to be as different as possible, right? Bringing in different day parts, different occasions. And that's important because it gives us a view of the customer across a broad range of experiences. Mm-hmm. But also in a franchise business, it's a lot easier to get existing franchisees excited about us when we buy a brand that they don't see as a competitor, right? So, and so it also makes it a lot easier in a franchise environment to where when you're bringing these brands together. So we've been able to be very thoughtful around what we want. Now, that's great. You can have that on a piece of paper. That doesn't mean that they're going to be available for acquisition, right? So it is this intersection point. But you have, I think, in an M&A, if you're an acquirer, the worst thing you can do is a bad deal. The worst thing you can do is do a deal and bring something into the portfolio that doesn't fit, or either from a capability standpoint, a business model standpoint, or obviously a brand portfolio standpoint. And so, we have looked at many, 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 many more things than we've actually taken action on. Mm-hmm. And I feel really good today of the portfolio that we've been able to put together in a short order. Again, the combination of what we would like to have versus what happens to be available.
So this is very interesting. Like, you're looking at very different brands from the perspectives of a customer sometimes, right? And for you, there is something commonality, there's this binding it together. How do you bring clarity in the brand from customer's perspective?
Yeah, I mean, that's, I think, the biggest trick in M&A is how do you keep all the good things that that come with the businesses that you're buying, particularly when you're buying brands that have been around for 50, 75 years, and franchise businesses where the franchisees joined that brand, and many of those franchisees have been part of that brand for sometimes generations, right? So, and so how do you not dilute that, yet also kind of build the value off of the platform? And there's a lot of cultural things that go into that as well. Mm-hmm. And so, we try to be very thoughtful around what remains brand specific, both organizationally as well as from a decision rights standpoint. What are things that we don't change and we respect the integrity of? But then what are things that we can actually utilize on the platform side? And then culturally, how do we create a culture at the Inspire level that is additive to the cultures that come along with us from a brand level, and respect, right, and respectful of the values and the purpose and the belief systems that come along. And it is a balancing act, and I think that, but it's the first thing we really started thinking about when we actually acquired Buffalo Wild Wings, is really what is going to be the belief system, the value system of Inspire, and how does that relate to the value system that came along with Buffalo Wild Wings? And we've really tried to keep that part of the process as we've gone through.
I'm very curious about how you attach a celebrity with a brand, like Ben Affleck with Dunkin'. How do you choose? what do you do? How do you go about doing that?
Well, Ben has been, I think what's interesting about Ben is it's quite authentic, right? Because he has been a customer and a lover of Dunkin' for a long time. And Ben's come apparently for many years to Dunkin' wanting to do some things with Dunkin'. But it is tricky, right? Because once you attach the brand to a celebrity, you got to do it in a very careful way for a lot of reasons, right? Particularly one that is already so related to the brand. But the story there, and I guess you're referring to the Super Bowl ads, is that Ben and Matt Damon, Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, actually created an agency a little over a year ago to actually go and do production, and so they came to us. Ben came to us and wanted Dunkin' to be the first customer, right? And so he brought a lot of the great ideas. My team's done an amazing job executing on those around how he could bring his persona to Dunkin', and J-Lo helped a little bit too. Now he's converted her to a Dunkin' customer, right? She used to be a big customer of the other brand. And
she has converted lots of people here to Dunkin'.
Yeah, exactly.
So that you know. Yeah.
But now she's a Dunkin' customer, and so.
Great. So, you often introduce new products. Like in Arby's, you were saying you're going to introduce a new product, and I went, and you were kind enough to invite me to your headquarters where I saw multiple kitchens, right, and producing new stuff and experimenting. So how often do you want to introduce new products? How do you determine what that product should be? And is it like the chefs make something up and the CEO sits down and tastes it and it's good and it's therefore good? Or how do you choose that?
Well, the restaurant industry, particularly QSR, is a very much top-of-mind type of business, right? Mm-hmm. You just have to always kind of stay on the top of mind of customers. And the way you do that is generally having new news to talk about and having interesting ways of talking about that new news, right? So, and so new products really create that opportunity. Mm-hmm. Now the trick, right, is to not have just disparate sets of new products out there, right? The trick is how do you have the products, and whether they be limited time products or permanent products that you're introducing, ladder up to the overarching theme and value proposition of the brands themselves, right? And actually, every time you talk about a new product, does it actually reinforce the overarching story you're really trying to tell and the value proposition you're trying to tell? So there's a lot of strategy that goes into that, right? Before you even, in the front end, before you even get into the culinary process. And so it is a very long cycle to really do it right. But we launch as a company hundreds of new products a year, across the various brands. Some big launches, some small launches. But it's that new product and innovation that really keeps it going. One reason Dunkin' has been doing so well over the past several years since we acquired them is some of the new products that we've launched, particularly on the beverage side, which has allowed us, again, to keep new news going, but also kind of tell a more interesting story about the brand that has allowed us to kind of create even more interest in customers that weren't necessarily Dunkin' customers even 3 years ago because of that.
If I remember correct, you mentioned that Baskin-Robbins is your big brand outside of the U.S.
Well, yeah, 2/3 of Baskin-Robbins is outside the United
outside
States, so it's a primarily non-U.S. based brand. And a lot of its business outside the U.S. is actually not in the stores themselves, but actually in grocery outlets. So it's a very different brand outside the U.S. in many ways.
I see. So let's talk a little bit about how artificial intelligence is really changing the business environment, and I'm sure it is having impact on your industry as well. And you have, I think, talked about the extensibility on Inspire's technology platforms. So tell us a little bit about that and how maybe AI is changing your demand forecasting or any other, what are the impacts that you are foreseeing?
So we've been utilizing AI obviously as behind the scenes significantly. A lot of what we're doing from a personalization of offers, of actually being much more intelligent around dynamically labor scheduling based upon forecasts. So that is a really big driver of value. And again, the more digital the industry becomes, right, obviously the more powerful as a tool that becomes. From a generative AI, I think we're still at early stages on that. I think where we're seeing some real opportunities is in the productivity of our frontline team members particularly, right? And if you think about this industry, it is a very labor-intensive industry, relatively high turnover industry. And in fact, if you look at us plus our franchisees, we are hiring over 1 million people a year. Right. And so you think about bringing 1 million people a year into the organization, bringing them up to speed from productivity tools, making sure that they have ready access to the information that they need, and helping, again, bring them up to productivity. That's a real opportunity for it, and we're just at the early stages on that side.
Great. So Paul, I remember when we were talking, you were very excited about some of the OKRs that you have implemented in the company, and that was kind of also very interesting to create some level of transparency and accountability. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, I mean, I think it's been really transformative how we're running the company. And, I'll go back to, 2022 was a really interesting year for us. We were about a year and a half into the Dunkin' integration. And if you think about it, we had brought 4 companies together in very short order. And when every company came in, it came in with stuff that it was already doing, right? And then we generally would add integration activities to that and try to prioritize, but the complexity layered upon itself. And so it really kind of came to a head in 2022. And we realized that we just had to think fundamentally differently around how we are prioritizing the business. And you put on top of that we're a highly matrixed organization. Right, so every part of the organization is depending upon another part of the organization to do something to allow them to do what they need to do, right? So the interrelationships are key. And so we decided to fully adopt the OKR process for the entire company from me all the way down, right? So it's not just one part of the organization. A lot of times, technology companies do this a lot, but not a lot of non-tech companies use this way of managing the entire business end to end. And so we rolled this out in 2023, and we've been successful that everyone in the company above the restaurant can go at any point in time and see every single OKR in the organization from me on down, can see what the tag is to what they're doing, and what they're doing is relating to everyone else. And it's really forced this great prioritization. I just spent 3 days, I'm looking at Meg, who helps us with that and has been instrumental in rolling it out. I spent 3 days already this week doing the retrospective on Q1, and it really just brings a real organizing factor. So I'm a disciple. I was skeptical, right, to be honest, right, at the beginning, but I have become an absolute disciple of how OKRs can really transform, particularly a complex multi-business unit, highly matrixed global organization like ours. And I think the biggest beneficiaries from that is really our technology teams, right? Because they were the ones that were getting, as you can imagine, if the business is not prioritizing very well, then obviously it kind of really thrashes the technology teams about. And so that's really was gone a long way to really us being clear on what's important to us, how it prioritizes, and then ultimately what we turn in.
So I think we have a lot of questions here, so please state your name in a short question so that we can get to the answers.
Will do. Zach Steinfeld, graduated in 17, actually first heard you speak in 13 or 14, so it's great to see you again. My question is about valuation and whether you're a buyer or a seller. So restaurant valuations these days are higher, some would say, than historical averages, so I wonder whether you're looking to be a buyer in this market or whether
some basic tips is what we are looking for here.
Yeah, it is today, right now, for a lot of reasons, is a more difficult environment to get deals done, and as evidenced by the fact that there's not a lot getting done, right? And it's not just equity valuations, but obviously the debt markets are much more expensive and harder to access as well. So, again, there is a moment in time, right, to whether it is the right environment for a deal to get done. And this is, for a lot of reasons, a bit of a tougher environment at this moment in time. Things can change, but at this moment in time, for a lot of factors, again, equity valuations being one of those.
Well, it could make it a good time for a sale. I was wondering when you mentioned Baskin-Robbins being an international, but it's different from your others. It could be diversification. It could also be a potential.
Yes.
I don't know.
I mean, our strategy is to bring brands in and tightly integrate them. And so you're not going to see us, particularly the brands that we've done that with, see this as a opportunistic kind of hold and then spin one out at the right time. We believe that we put these brands together for a reason, and we integrated them in such a way that they're not really designed to be spun out, right? So. And that's why, while we're backed by private equity, I would call us a private equity kind of portfolio play, right? That is more what a private equity firm would do with individual companies.
Makes sense. Well, thank you, and thank you for all you do for the school.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi, Jim Snyder, 2008 grad. Wrote down a question here for you. What is your vision for loyalty? I wanted to learn more about, we see so much about punch cards and the shift over to building community and brand loyalty. And then the second part of the question is, what is Inspire Brands doing to drive more first-party sales away from, delivery and the marketplace and things like that?
Well, the answers to two questions are actually kind of tied a little bit together, right? So, loyalty programs are still relatively new to the restaurant industry. I mean, obviously they've been out there for a while, but if you compare it to other industries, particularly hotels and airlines, we're still in the early days. But they are incredibly important, particularly for high-frequency brands, right? So, because not all brands are created equally, not even within our portfolio. So the more high-frequency, high-engagement brands, i.e. coffee, right, is a really good example of that. But the loyalty program plays a really critical role, right? And also, given the fact that our customer base is so broad, right, then you also run into the fact that your customers look very different from each other, right? In fact, across our portfolio, 75% of every man, woman, and child in this country eats in one of our restaurants every year. That's a very, very broad cross-section, right? And so the ability to actually be as targeted as possible, not only the offers, but how you talk to them and how you engage with them, the loyalty program plays an absolutely critical role in that, right? And you can see that, our brands that have higher penetration of loyalty generally, perform better than those that don't. But it's not a one-size-fits-all. And I think it's harder to think about designing loyalty programs in this industry than it is, for example, in hotels.
Right.
Because you have less levers to work with when it comes to actually tailoring the experience, generally. You have thinner economics to work with than to deal with it. and it's also harder to do on a portfolio play itself. On the first party, a lot of that comes with, what is the advantage of, working directly, coming directly through us, right? And some of that's a pricing advantage, in really all cases. The landed price, if you will, of going to the direct channel in the restaurant industry, not just for us, but our competitors, is lower than it is if you go through a third party. That's a dynamic that's different in the restaurant industry than it is in a lot of other industries. So there's that advantage. But we also have to make sure that the functionality is on parity as well, and that's where the third party delivery companies still kind of have a bit of an advantage. It's a bit more seamless experience, right? Both on the digital platform itself as well as the delivery side. So, we continue to focus on that.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Grace Golzinski. I'm a third-year student at Scheller right now. And I've heard Dean Mehrotra talk, since he's joined us, about his strategy of management by walking around. I was curious, you've come in at the top of several organizations, from Expedia to Hilton to Arby's, and you've had to work with the leadership teams and in order to be effective, really get to know them. I'm curious what your strategies have been for integrating yourself within those teams and truly becoming an effective leader of the companies.
I mean, I do think it's really important to be out and about, right? And quite honestly, that gets a little harder the bigger and more complex your organization gets. And I'll be honest, I spend more time, not in my office, but basically in the office than I certainly did when I was CEO of Arby's, right? And so that's something I think you have to watch out for. But there's nothing that substitutes for actually getting out, walking around the floors, having those. Actually, it's nice to be able to do this again, right? Having those hallway conversations, those elevator conversations. It's amazing how much can get done in a 3-minute elevator conversation versus kind of setting up an organized Zoom call or something like that. So I think it's really important that impromptu interaction is really important. But again, have to also respect the fact that I have a lot of leaders that you don't want to be kind of jumping around them and necessarily kind of getting in the way of their actually being a leader of their organization. So it is kind of this balancing act, and one that I'm still quite honestly learning and getting used to, as I become more the CEO of a portfolio of brands than the CEO of one brand.
Really interesting. Thank you so much.
Great question. Well, we'll have time for 3 more questions, and after that, if he's able to stick around, there'll be a chance for people to be able to ask questions.
Hey, Paul. I'm Ritvik Ramakrishnan. I'm a graduating senior doing an accelerated BSMS in computer science, and we'll be joining McKinsey out of college, and that kind of stems my question since I'm going to be consulting with them. I noticed that you also worked at BCG and McKinsey, and I wanted to understand, because you've talked a lot about the strategic decisions you make, from M&A to new products to technology. I guess my curiosity really stems from understanding at what point do you bring in an outsider consultant, right? What are the values that consultants bring to the table when you have a C-suite executive team with numerous years of experience, including yourself?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in consulting as a career path, particularly early days. I've learned so much about both of those firms. And so therefore, I'm also thoughtful around when we bring them in. And we do use consultants sometimes quite significantly. So I think where they're very valuable is if you have some real heavy lifting that is not really part of the day-to-day. Integration of businesses is a great example. I mean, that's probably the classic example, right? Is that we have a lot of really great people, but it's not necessarily their skill set, and you don't also have that resource level just sitting around ready to actually put in that surge capacity to do something as difficult and under the gun as an integration, for example. I also find that they're very helpful when you really want to step way back, right, and just kind of take the lens way out, right, because you can get pretty close to the business when you're in the business, right, which you should, right, and there's a lot of good that comes with that, right, but sometimes after myopia can kind of creep in every now and then. So when it's time to step back and say, is it time to rethink the positioning of brand X a little bit, or have we missed a little bit in as we started really focusing on the execution of a strategy, the world may have moved a little bit here and we've moved that. So I think it's really great to have them come in and help you zoom out. And then if it's actually getting into a new area of capabilities, I mean, bringing in some specialists and then having them sit side by side with your best and brightest in the company, it's a really good way of bringing them up to speed on something or helping them learn a new way of doing things. Coming in and just being arms and legs, or AUG staff, if you will, is something I think is where companies should be careful about falling into that, because value for money is probably a little less there, and ultimately that's what you probably should be insourcing versus outsourcing.
Thank you.
Hello there. My name is Calvin Rouse. Not a student. I actually work for Zenith Agency, which does Inspire Brands. I'm at the North Yards campus, and particularly I work on Arby's, actually. My question might be more for CTO versus you, but
Okay.
Are you anticipating integrating geofencing in with order tracking for customer orders?
Yes, I mean, and so the experience that we're working on with the drive-through too is that if you, and we have it live, and this is one example of that, right? You can also have other examples, as if you order ahead at a Dunkin', for example, and you pull on the property, we can tell whether you're turning toward the front door or whether you're going into the drive-through, right? And so, and if you're turning toward the front door, then the order will actually fire in the right place, knowing that you're going to come in and pick up. And if you turn toward the drive-through, it'll know that you're doing that, and also where you happen to be in the flow, and then ultimately know that you're the one pulling up in front of the menu board at the time, and it will change to a different experience, and then having those. So that is a real use case that we're actually working on scaling up, and it has a lot of great efficiencies for the restaurant, but also great experiences. Same thing, you can apply that same thing inside, a Buffalo Wild Wings, right? Depending upon where people happen to be. If you're actually trying to, as we're trying to work to where people can seamlessly transition from interfacing with a physical server to saying, now I want to start interfacing digitally, even within the same experience, and I know where you are. So there are a lot of really great use cases for that. I think we're very, very early days in trying to scale that up, but it's definitely a big part of the plan.
All right, thank you.
Hi, Chris Esposo, class of 2012. So given the potential of generative algorithms to transform customer interactions, but also their risk of generating inaccurate information, how do you balance the urgency to innovate at Inspire Brands with the caution required to manage these risks? Specifically, how do you evaluate the trade-off between being first mover and using these technologies within your domain versus waiting for the capabilities to mature? So, and just to anchor this, I just came back from GTC, and Jensen Huang sort of told the entire audience, all the engineers assembled, like, we have like a 5-year timeline to master the hallucination problem, which is an eternity, and companies like yours probably might be waiting. I'm just kind of curious what your view on that is.
Well, that's one of the reasons when I gave the example of where we're using generative AI is really more on an employee team member facing now, right? Is that you run into, I think, less of those issues, and certainly the risk and the legal risk. It's not the reason to do it, but the legal space around this is going, I think still early days, right? And so, and we've talked to a lot of other companies that are actually similar companies to ours, not just in our space, but others. And people are settling a bit down on work first and work on productivity tools for your team members, right? And do team member facing implementations of it. When you start getting to the consumer side, particularly of generative AI, I'm not saying don't do that, but it becomes a little bit, do you need to rush there versus we still have a lot of opportunities to actually generate a tremendous amount of value for our customers as well as us internally using other methods, right? So, but it's something we do think about. But I think you're right. Is that be thoughtful around how far out there do we need to be, at least in implementation. It doesn't mean we're not actually continuing to actually work and think and try things, in the right way there. But broad implementations of that, we have a lot of upside in a lot of areas before we need to actually go there, particularly consumer facing.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Let me ask you one final question, Paul, before we close for the session today. You had mentioned to me that you want the very best on your team. So tell us what that best is in this audience, because there are many people who are looking to be working for Inspire Brands, and why should they come work for Inspire Brands?
Yeah, I think that best is the right attitude and cultural fit, right? I think there's the skill wheel, right? People talk about it. You can say different things, right? And so obviously you have to be at a certain level of skill, right? And but I love people that just really want to be part of something, really want to actually go that extra mile, the put me in coach kind of thing, right? Or are constantly saying, how can I help that other person? Because again, we're a matrixed organization. I've said that several times. But that means nobody can really get anything significant done without other people's help, right? Which means, therefore, you need people that actually want to work with other people and know that it's a team type of environment and really want to pitch in and really want to help. And I think that's what we try to hire to. I also like looking for, people that have had some failures in their career or in their, and actually have picked themselves up and kind of figured it out and kind of moved on, right? And again, I think that's a bit of a will thing too. It can't overcome not having the appropriate skill, but you can, as long as you can get to a certain level of skill, you can kind of train for capabilities over here. I think it's really hard to take somebody who doesn't have the right kind of will and kind of get them there. I think it's really kind of something that comes with that individual.
Well, Paul, thank you very much. So much enjoyed our conversation today.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I also want to thank you all for attending today. Our next session is on April 18th, and our distinguished guest will be Barbara Humpton, CEO of Siemens USA. I hope you will join us then. Thank you again.
Thank you.